Okay, hello, good afternoon. Hi everyone, welcome to Figuring It Out. I'm Amber Glendale McClendon. I'm hosting a conversation with you all, really just exploring what it takes to become an artist. Now for me, that means a lot less about the technical skills that you develop, even though that is an important part of being an artist. For me, it's far more about accepting your art form and then presenting that to the world. So I've brought Kacey Gill with us. She is an emerging Cleveland-based artist who's graduated recently from Harvard, cum laude with a African American Studies degree. She does mixed media, and she has a show opening with Devon Brantley at the Waterloo Gallery in Cleveland, Ohio, this January 8th, and that'll be running, exploring the art of different women of color based in Cleveland. So hello, Kacey, if you'd like to just introduce yourself really quickly.
Hi, my name is Kacey Gill. I am a mixed media artist amongst other things that I do. I was born and raised in Cleveland, went away to Massachusetts for college, and now I'm back. My art practice basically just focuses on Black people, but specifically exploring the Black body within space. Space in a variety of meanings, both geographically, space as in time, space as in different forms of labor, all sorts of stuff. So yeah, that's me.
Okay, thank you. And for those of you who don't know me and Kacey personally, I think a lot of people who know me do know Kacey because we have been best friends for a very long time. So this conversation is going to be a little more informal. And as two young artists who are finding our practice and our passion, I wanted to explore with Kacey what that means for us. So I guess I'll just get started and we'll dive in here. Kacey, I want you to tell me about the first thing that you ever made, the first thing that you made that felt like art to you, that felt worthy of claiming as something, as creation.
Well, I mean, I've been creating art since I was little. I am a mixed media artist. My practice is a combination of painting, sculpture. I do a lot of like carpentry, woodshop stuff. I dabble in photography. Pretty much like I love to just try out different mediums and explore different materials and see what I can create and how I can convey a message better using different stuff. So I was born and raised in Cleveland. I've known Amber since we were literally 10 years old. I went away to school in Massachusetts. I went to Harvard and got a joint degree in African American Studies and Social Studies. So basically I studied Black people. I wrote my senior thesis on Black body modification, so specifically looking at skin bleaching, hair detexturizing, and plastic surgery. And I examined the way in which beauty is a form of capital and the ways in which one can manipulate their body in order to gain that capital and ultimately change their social standing. So for my art practice, I am building on the research that I did in my undergraduate time. So I'm looking at the Black body specifically. I ground the Black body in my understanding of America as a racial, spatial, capitalist empire. So, I mean, we all understand the racial element. Pretty much all of us understand the capitalistic element. But the spatial is something that I really focus on. So looking at the Black body across geography, looking at the density of Black bodies, understanding the way the Black body has functioned throughout space over time, understanding also the space of labor and how the labor of the Black body transforms it, dehumanizes it, et cetera, et cetera. So my practice explores all of that. If you come see the show, you'll see a couple pieces highlighting a few different things. One is some of the woodshop stuff that I do. One is a painting and another one is a sculpture. And yeah.
Thank you very much, Kacey. Okay, so we're back in action, and I really love the way you broke all of that down. I think you touched on a lot of really important concepts that really can never be explored enough because of the weight in our daily life. I want to focus on the way that we get to that production. So the ideas are important, the concepts are important, the impact that you want on the world is important. But for this podcast, I want to get a little bit behind those ideas, and I want to see like what gets you to the place where you feel comfortable sharing those things, because even though they do pertain to our daily life and they are really important, those are also really heavy and big topics. Even understanding them doesn't necessarily mean that you always have the courage or the energy to engage with those things. So I want to see where that comes from. I want to see where the drive to even get there comes from. So for everyone who's joining now, this is Figuring It Out with Amber Glendale, and we are just exploring what brings you to becoming an artist. So for some people, that is really technically driven, but what I want to explore more is the personal side of that. So it's not just about the skills that you have, but it's about the spirit that you bring to that. So Kacey, you were telling me a little bit about your mom and how she inspired your creation, how she poured into you, how she, although she might not describe herself as an artist, you see her in that space. So can you tell me just a little bit more about that?
Sure, yeah. So my mom, particularly when she was younger, like high school, college age, she was an amazing artist. She was able to, drawing was her medium. And so I grew up with some of her drawings, particularly one of my great grandmother that hung in our hallway, in our upstairs hallway. And just the importance of art was always something that she prioritized. She made sure growing up I was always in art classes. I was always doing that. And I think she also recognized very early on for me that art was something that was really important for me in regards to like my mental and emotional health, and being able to like balance all of the ideas that were in my mind. So yeah, I mean, I credit her a lot with kind of giving me the foundation that I'm building upon now.
And that is really powerful and really beautiful. Like you're talking about your mom taking you to all these art classes and having her own practice that she doesn't, I mean, I didn't know that your mom was an artist. And for a little bit of background, I've known Kacey for 13 years. Like I call her mom, my mom. And I love that I didn't know that because I know for me in finding myself as an artist, art was not always something I shared with people. And so when I hear you talk about your mom putting you in all these classes, I am reminded of my own childhood where my mom, who also wouldn't call herself an artist, but I think she's one of the best poets I know, did invest a lot in creating a practice for me, even though she didn't affirm that practice for herself. And so I guess what I'm really asking, because you have created a lot, I've always known you to be creative. We were in the same art classes together. But what I'm asking is, for me, there was a distinction between just drawing something and creating something. Is there a distinction for you?
I mean, yeah, I think that distinction happened for me like pretty recently. My entire art practice is like, it really is like truly an extension of research, right? Like I am using my art to try to answer questions that I could not answer through like the typical academic research. And I think transitioning into that sort of mindset away from just doing assignments, I think that's where I started to really find myself creating like truly what I would consider to be art.
I really resonate too with that idea that like you use it to explore a lot of different things, and that art can be another way of engaging with the world that is also very serious. I guess that So in hearing about this practice and the way that you extend your research that you've engaged with before, and where you're furthering that practice, I want to know more about the pieces of that that are not involved with the content itself, but with what you bring to the practice of producing. Am I saying that in a way that's clear?
Can you can you try again?
Say it again. Yeah, say it again. Okay. So art we use in a lot of ways. You use it to explore all these topics that you've seen talked about in academia, you've seen talked about in books. You can talk on a panel about them. But you're exploring it in a way that that language can't capture.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Correct.
What I want to talk about is how you get to the place where that language of your artistic medium feels tangible to you.
Feels tangible to me?
Yeah, like, okay,
like
so
why the art instead of the like intellectual stuff, or like I guess it is still intellectual, but why the art instead of like me writing papers and like publishing shit. Can I curse? Oh
yeah, you can curse. No, not why the art. You can tell me why the art. I think that's an important part of what I'm getting at. I guess the place that I want to get to is how. How do you get to a place where you feel comfortable creating? How do you get to a place where you feel comfortable with engaging with these ideas in a way that is not what you've seen before? Like you use your sculpture, and I don't want to, again, give too much away, but you have a lot of really powerful sculptures that we've talked about with a lot of really big ideas behind them. So how do you get to the place where you feel the drive or feel the courage or feel the necessity to be making that thing?
well, so I think like on a general level, like the I definitely feel like it is necessary for me to create art. I think one of my biggest issues with my college experience was that I felt there were so many questions, but not every question can be answered only by thinking. There are some questions that have to be answered through doing, through creating in particular. I also felt, and we talked about this before, like I felt like I was missing a sort of appreciation or reverence towards Black labor. And I guess I need to explain that a bit. So, I mean, both of us come from a background, we are descendants of slaves. Our ancestors, I mean, they were forced to labor, right? Laboring is something that is in our blood for both good and bad purposes. Like the same people who were enslaved and forced to cultivate land for white people, for white slave masters, they also learned and grew, and with their same bodies, with their same hands, they fed their families and they created legacies that like allowed us to exist. And I don't know, I felt like I was disconnected from that sort of that lineage. Like, what does it mean for me to really appreciate what my body, what my hands can do, to connect that to my mind and create things? So that kind of like drove me, like that kind of is a foundation for my like need to create. I think when it comes to specific pieces, I mean, my mind doesn't ever stop. I'm constantly going. Like, there are constantly 10 different things. It's like I imagine my brain looks like a news station or something, where you have like all these different monitors, and like each monitor has a different angle or a different thing happening. And so it's just I just get overwhelmed, and so things just have to like come out. And is a way that I find that they can come out in clear ways. Like, instead of me having to like hold on to them, they can have their own lives of their own, all of these ideas. And I can do that in a way that feels like very fulfilling, and feels like it could actually impact the world in some capacity.
Yeah, okay, so you said two things I really love, actually, and that I think resonate with me very deeply, that I feel them very powerfully, but I had never thought of them in these words. So the first one was about Black labor, because a lot of your work does deal with the Black body, and we know that the Black body has so many implications. It's not just the body of a person, but it carries all of these social taboos, all these expectations, all of these tasks that it's seen as achieving, even in the original Black bodies here. So there was an idea behind what they did. So instead, going back and saying, well, this body is still mine, and apart from that history, it does all of these things that can be very beautiful. And so exploring what that means, what it is to let my body create. I love that idea. And then going further and saying, these creations also have a life, because they're born out of all these other things that are going on inside of me. And it's just the inertia of that, almost like it just keeps going. And so even beyond my body, these things keep doing, they keep creating. And I see that creation again in how we can influence each other. And like the role of art is to spark dialogue, to spark discussion, to help people think and see in new ways. And so it does keep going, and it keeps carrying all of these functions the same way the body does, without a physical form a lot of times. I love that idea. I think that is what I look to in the power of art. And I just really appreciate you saying that. I think for me, when I think about those things, then it's like that is, to me, what art is. It's that carrying on. And I think a lot of times we get caught up, or at least I know I get caught up in like how good this thing is, good in quotations. But it's really about the expression of that like human form in so many different ways, and like human form of the mind as well. So I just want to keep going with these questions we have here. And I think I actually want to go back a bit again, thinking still about all the things that the body can do and how your creations take on a life in their own way. I want to know what that means, especially if you're creating not only for an audience. Like you have a show coming up, and you've done shows in the past, but that's not the only reason you create. Like you've been creating for years beyond that. And I presume that you'll continue to create regardless of whether or not there's a show. So what does it mean for that art to exist and to function if it's not for an audience?
I mean, I think it's hard. I think there's always an audience, even if it's not like necessarily a gallery or a show like that. I mean, I am both the creator, but I am also the audience. I think that the process of me creating art, like I said, all of my art is also me trying to answer these questions that I was not able to answer like through other more traditional forms of research. So even then, like thinking about myself then as the audience, here's this process, here I'm building something, here I'm finding a new way to understand these like super theoretical interpretations of the world and the body that I exist in. And then how stepping back from that, how do I view that? What do I learn from that? And then how do I put that into conversation with the other things that I already knew, or the truths that I thought were fact or whatever? I guess at the end of the day, for me, I always feel like there's an audience. Like even if the audience is just me, I don't think this is necessarily true for everyone, but I feel like when something is created, it's never truly private. Even like for myself, like there's this distinction of like, once I create it, it exists in the public world, even if there aren't eyes that are on it, but now it is no longer like private in the same way that it was when it was just in my mind.
Okay, so that's very interesting. So then I'm almost wondering, what is that feeling for you of creation if it never feels private anymore?
I mean, it's tough, bro. I think it's a large reason why a lot of the questions I've asked are things that are of me, but not are about me. Like there are very personal things that I could be exploring. And yet I always tend towards asking questions or exploring themes or topics that have a little bit of distance, that still affect me and all of those things, but don't necessarily show my soul in the same way. And I think as I continue my practice and evolve, I would like to get there. I would like for my work to be, at least some of my work to be of me and about me, in the least sort of like narcissistic way that it can be. But I'm not there yet. I think it's hard enough. I know like the focus isn't on the technical stuff, but I mean, imposter syndrome is real. Like it's hard enough to feel like, oh shit, maybe I'm like not good enough to be doing that. And then on top of feeling that way, then be like, oh shit, I'm not good enough. And now everybody knows my business. So yeah, I mean, it's something that I'm working through and I'm not trying to rush it. It's just definitely highlighted because like I've always done poetry and things like that. And that is like, my soul is like always in there. You can see me, you can read me, you know shit about me immediately. And this art practice is just like a little bit different. So I am figuring it out.
Yes, I love the way you brought that back. And yeah, you're very, very right about the vulnerability thing. I think that imposter syndrome is real. And so like asking yourself to be judged on all those different planes is a lot. And it puts out a lot. It also expects a lot of the world to be compassionate and to be kind and forgiving, which it's not always. But I'm thinking about this because that's another thing I didn't know about your practice. To me, it always seemed like, well, and I guess because your creation is a piece of you in a way, it still is a very vulnerable thing to share with the world. and it is still a piece of you that you're giving. But I didn't know that you made the choice to keep parts of yourself away from that. And so I'm also kind of wondering, what do you think is the connection between your academic studies and what you produce? And I know generally the subjects are the same, but I guess I'm asking, do you think it is intentional that you spent 4 years of your life devoted to studying something that feels vulnerable in a way, but also very safe?
Well, I mean, I think my academic studies had a lot of range in them. Like there were things that I studied that I didn't necessarily write my senior thesis on, but that I studied that were about those like very personal things. But I think, I don't know, academia, the nature of academia, at least the way that it's set up in the sort of like European colonialist rhetoric kind of format, it is sort of like impersonal. Like we even the way that we are asked to verbalize our thoughts when writing essays and things, it's supposed to be formal and impersonal. You're not supposed to like lay it all on the line. If anything, it's supposed to be more persuasive, like you're arguing something. You're not narrating. You're not sharing yourself. So I mean, yeah, like I said, like I had some amazing classes on things that were like extremely personal, classes that were specifically about like Black women and sexual assault, and like Black women and what it means to like be feminine and exotified, and the ideas of Black motherhood and all of these things that like are deeply personal to me and like feel like they informed my essence, if that makes sense. I just think it's easier to kind of like let those classes, let that knowledge be somewhere else from like what I'm currently exploring.
Okay, that is interesting. I appreciate you being candid about that. I think we do always make decisions about like what we're going to share with the world, even in just how we dress in the day-to-day. And so doing that with your art, doing that with your studies and how they inform one another, it makes sense. It flows logically. But I guess then I want to talk more about vulnerability in art, because even though these are subjects that you said feel just a bit safer because they're a bit more removed from your person, even though they do still have to do with who you are. I want to talk about how you get to a place where you're deciding that this is a thing that can be shared. And I guess that can be in terms of the ideas that you play with in your art, but then also in the thing itself, because you said even creating still feels very public, even if you're just creating for yourself. So how do you come to a place where you feel like, okay, this is time to let this go? I know you said you create out of necessity, but I think that we all make choices about how to be vulnerable in the interest of self-preservation. So how do you come to a place where you decide it is okay and I'm ready?
I mean, I think it's complicated because, like, visual arts is not the only art form that I have explored, and I feel like it's a personal tool. Um, so there are topics that I think I could push myself and say, like, I want to be vulnerable in this way now so that I can incorporate X topic into my visual practice. But I don't necessarily know if there's always the need for that. I think that the visual art world is unique. I think the contemporary art world is unique. And I think there are certain discourses and certain norms that are definitely influencing which topics I choose to investigate. I think also the way that, like, again, going back to the audience, how your work is shared is also very unique when it comes to visual arts, right? It necessitates a photograph or a video or an in-person exposure versus like poetry. Like, I can just put that on Twitter, like, done. I mean, of course I can put a photo on Twitter, but it feels different. So I say all of this to say that I'm not necessarily convinced when it comes to my personal art practice that all parts of me have to be there. I think there are pieces that I would like to be there, but there's also some things where I'm just like, I don't want to have to see that. Like, I don't want this thing to have a life of its own in the way where, like, I have to visualize it again. Versus reading about it, I don't know, it's different. Or like the poetry is different, or singing about it is different. So I think it's a combination of self-preservation, but I think it's also just like things are really complicated and messy, and I am fortunate enough to feel like I have all these different tools, and so finding which lane fits whichever thing I'm trying to explore best, I think that's what is kind of driving me at this point.
Okay, so as we're coming close to wrapping up, I want to give you a chance, and I want to hear, because I think the space is a bit different than when we talk with each other just in our day-to-day. I want to hear about how you intend to move forward in those different practices, or what are the things that you want to carry with you forward from what you have gotten from your mother, what you learned previously, what you're experiencing now.
I think fundamentally my path moving forward is based upon my desire to learn as much as I can and be exposed to as much as I can. So learning as many different techniques so I can utilize as many materials as possible. Like, I think in the next month I'll have the opportunity to really like figure out how to use concrete as a material. And I think that will open a lot of doors for me, especially because, like, concrete, unlike a lot of the other work that I've done, that's something that could be a public artwork. Like, that is the sort of material that can exist outside in Cleveland winters and still be Gucci. I think one of my goals moving forward is also, though, to find a way to document the moments when I feel like I'm finding answers to my questions. And it's hard to do that, but like, for example, with a painting series that I'm still building out, I'm viewing the Black body in the context of violence, but not as the object or subject of violence, not as even a participant in the violence, but as sort of like a neutral observer to violence. And I'm asking questions of, like, why does our society, like, why is that never the thing, right? Like, why is it the Black body that's always having to absorb the violence? Why is the Black body, period, always like the protagonist or antagonist? Like, Black bodies aren't allowed to just like exist. We have to be doing something, or we have to be having something done to us. And also then understanding like the nature of just sort of like neutral observation or neutral existence. Like, is that a privilege? And like, what is the nature of that? And how is that privilege different than like privileges that we understand otherwise? How is that connected to our sort of like idea of like whiteness as default? Like, if you are not allowed to be like default, if you're not allowed to be the backdrop, then you have to be sort of the accent. So finding a way, as I like explore these topics, like, how do I then compile all of that? Because realistically, as I continue to create, my works are not going to all live together. It's not like you're going to be able to go, even if I were to have my own gallery someday, LOL if that ever happens, even just walking into there, not all the work that I do is going to be there. So it's like all of these sort of like places of arrival that I'm coming to, they're not going to be able to be in conversation with each other in the same way that they are when I'm creating. So again, finding a way to compile that and like have it as a tool that's not just for me but for others, and translating that so it can exist not in sort of this isolated contemporary art world, but can exist and be utilized in like the same scholarship that I found was lacking in certain ways. I think that's a big thing for me moving forward. And then finally, I mean, I think that in addition to art being a great tool to spark conversation and ideas in people's minds, I really, especially after having come back to Cleveland, recognize that art is a tool for political and structural change. And I would recommend everyone research Theaster Gates, who's this like really dope artist based in Chicago. A lot of his work, he uses tar because his dad was a roofer and that was like the only material he had access to. But he's done some amazing stuff with basically like quote unquote redeveloping Chicago, the south side of Chicago, but like in a way that is like community driven, driven by Black people, like to benefit the people who have lived there forever, like not just like saying we're going to gentrify this neighborhood and call it redevelopment, not like that. So finding a way, like, how can I make my art sort of like in that same vein? How can I like invest in the community and invest in shaping the city that like I owe everything to, shaping it and making it a better place for all these like other Black people, particularly the young Black people who are just coming up. Yeah.
Wow. Okay, thank you for that, Kacey. I think those are beautiful goals, and I actually loved your point about arriving. Like, a piece is always you coming to something, whether it's a conclusion, whether it's a question, whether it's an acceptance. Like, it's always, it in itself, among many other things, is also a monument. And so I really appreciate you saying that. And I will definitely be checking out the Astor Gates. Yeah, that sounds very, very cool. I'd be interested in hearing about someone who uses their practice to truly uplift the community. So thank you so much for speaking with me today. For anyone who missed the intro, this was Figuring It Out with Amber GM. I can be reached at YUNGALLYCE on Instagram and Twitter, in which I have links to all my other stuff. Kacey can be reached at KACEYLIZ, Kacey Liz, on Instagram. And then I hope you all have a great afternoon. And the show will be ending here, but the radio will continue.